When Claire Jensen, a small-town mechanic barely scraping by, bid on a rust-covered shipping container at a dusty government auction. She thought she was just buying scrap. But the moment those heavy doors creaked open and a cloud of dust rolled out from beneath the tarp inside, everything changed. What she found wasn't junk. It was the beginning of a secret buried for decades, and a chance at redemption she never saw coming. Before we dive into this unbelievable discovery, tell us where in the world you're watching from, and if stories about forgotten treasures and life-changing twists make your engine roar, hit that subscribe button, because the next story in this series is even more shocking than this one. The sun beat down hard on the cracked black top of the old shipping yard, turning every metal container into a silent oven. Claire Jensen squinted under the brim of her hat, sweat already collecting at the base of her neck as she walked the auction row. She'd been to 3 of these government liquidation events this year, and each time, she left with nothing but sunburn and disappointment. Today didn't feel much different. Most of the lots were already open old desks from decommissioned offices, broken forklifts, pallets of outdated computer monitors stacked like brittle towers of dead dreams. Nothing worth the tow fee, let alone the price. But then she saw it. Tucked between 2 towering stacks of colored containers was a rusted-out unit, paint blistered from the heat and streaked with years of grime. It didn't even have a proper number tag on the manifest sheet, just a handwritten note that read, "Unclaimed. Lot 94G. Contents unknown. Buyer assumes all risk." Claire tilted her head. No photos, no preview, just a dented, sealed box. Most bidders didn't even give it a glance. She heard one guy joke it probably held a dead printer and a couple of rats. But something in Claire's gut twisted, and not in a bad way. It felt like the way her dad used to look at junkyard finds, like, maybe, just maybe, there was something under the rust worth saving. Her boots crunched over gravel as she walked up to it, pressing a gloved hand against the side. The metal was warm, silent, heavy with stories no one had bothered to ask about. Claire stood there for a long moment, listening to the faint hum of wind between the containers and the distant bark of the auctioneer calling out final numbers. She couldn't afford much, not really. Her bank account had barely 4 figures in it, and most of that was already spoken for by bills and a leaking air compressor at her shop. But logic had never been her strongest suit when instinct kicked in. She bit the inside of her cheek and turned back toward the auction crowd, just as the auctioneer moved down the row. When he reached lot 94G, his voice barely changed. Unclaimed. Contents unknown. Starting bid, 100. A few people chuckled. Someone muttered something about scrap weight. Claire raised her hand. 150, she said. The auctioneer blinked, looked around. Do I hear 2? Silence. Going once, no one moved. Going twice, Claire's heart thudded. Sold. To the lady in the back, 150. A few heads turned, a couple snickers, but Claire didn't care. The bid tag was handed to her, and she signed the paper with a shaking hand. It was hers now. Whatever it was, she had no clue what she'd just bought. But something told her it wasn't just scrap. It was a feeling. The same kind her dad used to get. And she'd learned a long time ago, when you feel that pull in your gut, you follow it, even if it takes you somewhere you never expected. Claire stood at the edge of the shipping yard, arms crossed tight across her chest, staring at the sealed container like it might suddenly confess its secrets. The rest of the auction crowd had already moved on, their laughter echoing faintly between rusted steel walls. She could still hear someone say, "That's going to be the most expensive pile of nothing she ever bought." She ignored it. That wasn't new. People had been underestimating her since the day she took over her father's shop. Still, her stomach knotted as she walked back to her truck and fished her phone out of the glove box. She dialed Terry, her cousin, with a flatbed and a bad attitude, and prayed he wasn't too hungover to answer. He picked up on the 3rd ring, voice rough. "Yeah? I need a haul. Container from a gov auction. It's big." He groaned. "Claire, it's Saturday. You want gas money or not?" A beat. Then, Text me the address." She hung up and leaned against the fender of her pickup, eyes drifting back toward the lot. The sun had started to dip lower now, casting long shadows across the shipping yard. It made the container look even more ominous, like a forgotten tomb just waiting to be cracked open. She chewed the edge of her thumbnail, the bid slip crumpled in her pocket. It felt impulsive now, reckless even. But something inside her whispered it was the right kind of reckless. By the time Terry showed up an hour later, sweat-stained and irritable, she was pacing like a cat in a cage. He killed the engine and stepped out, baseball cap backwards, sunglasses sliding down his nose. "You really bought this thing?" he asked, eyeing the container. Claire nodded. "Yup. What's inside?" "No clue." He laughed, a single bark of disbelief. "You bought a locked box? Sight unseen?" "You've seen my dating history," she shot back. He smirked, but the amusement didn't last. "This thing's gonna be heavy. Can you move it or not?" Terry ran a hand across his jaw, then nodded. "Yeah, give me a minute." It took nearly an hour to load. The forklift was temperamental, the container heavier than it had any right to be. When they finally had it strapped down and secured, Claire signed the yard's release papers and followed Terry back to her shop in the outskirts of town, her fingers tapping restlessly against the steering wheel the entire way. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every bump in the road made her worry about what could be breaking inside. When they finally arrived, Terry backed the flatbed into the shop's rear lot and lowered the container gently into place. The sun was nearly gone now, sky streaked with gold and lavender. Claire stood in front of it in the fading light, hands on her hips. Terry spat in the gravel. "You gonna open it tonight?" She hesitated. "No," she said quietly. "Tomorrow. Daylight." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. She waited until he pulled away, and the engine faded before walking up to the door and laying a hand against the metal once more. Still warm, still silent, still holding its breath. The next morning came with a restless sky, not stormy, not clear, just that kind of washed-out gray that made the air feel heavier than it should. Claire stood in front of the container in her shop's backlot, holding a crowbar in one hand and a mug of burnt coffee in the other. She hadn't slept much, kept waking up, mind racing with possibilities. Treasure, trash, some forgotten relic, or maybe just broken office chairs and moldy file cabinets. But hope had a funny way of clawing through doubt when you needed it most. She set the mug down on the gravel, slid her gloves on, and stared up at the rusted locking bar. The government-issued bolt seal was still intact, bright orange, stamped with a series of numbers she didn't recognize. It hadn't been tampered with, no signs anyone had opened it in decades. Claire pressed her lips together, fitted the crowbar under the latch, and gave it a tug. Nothing. She adjusted her grip and tried again. Metal groaned under the strain, flaking rust and dust into the air. One more pull, and the lock snapped loose with a pop that echoed off the surrounding fence like a gunshot. Her breath caught. The doors creaked as she pried them open. Slow, reluctant. One swung first the left, easier to budge. The right dragged along the gravel with a shriek, leaving a scar in the dirt as it opened wider. Then came the smell, stale, metallic, and dry, like the air inside had been trapped since the Cold War. She stepped back. Inside, darkness clung to every surface. But at the center of it, illuminated by a single shaft of light cutting through the container's ceiling vent, was a shape, something large, covered in a thick tan tarp, the kind you'd expect on military convoys or desert trucks. Dust puffed out from beneath it, curling like smoke as it caught the sunlight. The floor beneath the tarp was steel, not the usual plywood paneling most containers had. And whatever was underneath, it was big, too big to be furniture. Claire felt her pulse in her throat. She stepped into the container, boots echoing faintly on the steel deck. The air was warmer inside, heat trapped for years, still clinging to the walls. She circled the tarp slowly, running her hand over the fabric. It was stiff with age, crusted with time. Something beneath it clicked. As she touched it, A soft metallic shift, like a mechanism unlocking itself. She froze, took a step back. The tarp lifted slightly on its own, as if the weight inside had shifted. A puff of dust rolled outward again, hanging in the light. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "What the hell are you?" She didn't lift the tarp. Not yet. She needed to know what she was dealing with. And she was starting to get the feeling this wasn't government surplus. This was something else. Something buried. Something built to stay hidden. Claire stood at the edge of the container, heart thudding like it was trying to outrun her ribs. She hadn't moved in over a minute, just stared at the slow swirl of dust still drifting up from beneath the tarp. The way it moved like it had been disturbed from inside made her skin crawl. She told herself it was nothing, just settling, just heat. But some part of her knew better. She stepped back into the container and gripped the corner of the canvas with both hands. The tarp was heavier than it looked, dense with years of grime and stiff from time. She pulled carefully at first, not wanting to tear anything whatever was underneath. It wasn't junk, not from the feel of the structure beneath her gloves. The fabric peeled back with a hiss of displaced air, revealing smooth, angular metal. Not the faded chrome or rusted aluminum she was used to seeing in junkyards, but something darker, sleek. Slate gray, with matte black fasteners. No visible branding. No paint chips. No serial numbers. Just seamless construction. Cold to the touch. Claire's breath caught. This wasn't a car. Not exactly. It had wheels heavy duty, all-terrain tires, but the undercarriage looked reinforced in a way she'd never seen. A compartment in the back was bolted shut, protected by reinforced plates. The sides were paneled like a tactical vehicle, but smoother, streamlined. And on the hood, half obscured by the last folds of canvas, was a symbol. 3 intersecting triangles forming a broken circle, with faint lettering underneath. Claire crouched, wiping away a layer of dirt with her sleeve. The letters were clean-cut. Machine stamped. Section 7. Prototype 03 Alpha. She sat back on her heels. Section 7? She'd never heard of it. And she spent most of her life elbow-deep in machines. Her eyes swept over the rest of the vehicle. The front resembled a compact military ATV but with more armor and no visible ignition, no steering column. Instead, the dashboard housed what looked like a touch interface, dark and lifeless now, but far too modern for something that looked this old. Like it had been waiting for someone to wake it up. Claire stood again, slowly walking the perimeter of the vehicle. There were cables secured with rubber ties along the frame, and tiny ports inlaid along the surface, some familiar, some completely alien. She recognized a cooling unit but couldn't identify the power source. It wasn't gas. There was no intake valve, no exhaust, and that scared her more than anything, because this wasn't just a vehicle. It was a machine built for something specific, something someone never meant to be found. Claire stepped out of the container, lightheaded. Her gloves were coated in dust and something oily she couldn't name. She peeled them off slowly, letting them drop onto the gravel. Whatever this was, it didn't belong to any world she'd ever worked in, and now it was sitting in her back, lot like a sleeping giant. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat at the workbench in her shop, staring at the gloves she'd left, crumpled beside the sink. Her hands were clean now, but the smell of metal and dust still lingered on her skin. She kept running the symbol through her head, the overlapping triangles, the words, Section 7. No part of it made sense. She'd seen Department of Energy stamps before, even NASA surplus from a guy who used to flip retired satellite parts. But this felt different. It felt forgotten on purpose. By mid-morning, she was back at the container, clipboard in one hand, flashlight in the other. She needed to document it. Carefully, quietly. Part of her wanted to call someone a reporter, a historian, hell, even a conspiracy podcast, but something held her back. Not fear, exactly. Just caution. Whatever this was, it wasn't for the public. Not yet. She climbed into the container and circled the vehicle again. There were still parts she hadn't uncovered, fully compartments tucked beneath the undercarriage, sealed hatches on the sides. But it was the passenger side rear that caught her eye now. A metal box was bolted into the wall of the container, tucked behind the vehicle like an afterthought. It hadn't been touched in decades. The bolts were rusted, the hinges swollen. Claire grabbed a wrench and got to work. It took 15 minutes to free it. The box dropped with a loud clunk, sending a puff of gray dust into the air. She dragged it outside into the light, heart pounding again, just like it had the day before. It wasn't locked. The latches snapped open with a satisfying click, and when she peeled back the lid, she froze. Inside were stacks of papers yellowed, stamped, some water-stained, technical drawings, schematics, field test results, all with the same triangular symbol in the top corner. But beneath those were photos, black and white, some Polaroids, men in lab coats standing beside prototypes, clipboards in hand. One showed the very vehicle sitting behind her, but without wheels. It was suspended by cables in what looked like an underground hangar, and then she saw the names. A roster paper, clipped to the corner of the folder. Project Echo, Personnel Clearance Level 4. Dozens of names. Scientists, engineers, mechanics. Next to them, departments she didn't recognize. Environmental Interception, Quantum Relay, Bioadaptive Interface Team. Claire's fingers slowed. Halfway down the list, her eyes locked on one line. Jensen, Mark, Mechanical Systems Advisor. Her breath caught. Her father's name. She stared at it, unmoving, heart stuttering behind her ribs. Her dad had been a military mechanic, she knew that. But he never talked specifics. Said everything from those years was buried under paperwork and time. She'd assumed it was just old war stories, scrubbed for security. But he hadn't just worked on military gear. He'd worked on this project, this vehicle, whatever this was. He'd kept it from her. And now, years after his passing, the truth was sitting in a rusted container, whispering stories he'd never told. It was just after 10 p.m. when the knock came. Claire had been sitting alone in the shop office. Lights low, a single desk lamp casting a pool of yellow over the spread of documents she'd laid out. She was halfway through a page marked Field Diagnostics, Version 2, trying to make sense of the symbols in the margins, when the sharp rap at the front door made her jump. The whole building went still. She wasn't expecting anyone. The gates had been locked since sundown. She stood slowly, her heart suddenly louder than her footsteps. Through the dusty glass window she saw a figure, male, tall, wearing a jacket with a high collar, hands in his pockets, unmoving. Claire slid the drawer open, grabbed the flashlight heavy and metal and moved to the door. "You lost?" she called through the glass. "No," the man said calmly. "You opened the container." Her stomach dropped. The deadbolt clicked louder than she meant it to. She cracked the door open 2 inches. "Who are you?" He held up both hands. "Not here to cause trouble. Name's Alan Burke. I used to work with your father." Claire's grip on the door tightened. "You knew Mark Jensen?" "Yes, a long time ago. Back when he still wore a badge and didn't tell anyone what he was working on." She opened the door fully now, but didn't step aside. "What do you want?" "To help, and to warn you." That made her pause. Alan stepped into the light. He looked to be in his 60s, face weathered but sharp. His eyes, steel gray, didn't waver. "I know what's in the container. And I know what happens when people find it who aren't supposed to." Claire let him in. Inside, she poured 2 mugs of coffee, her hands steadier than she expected. Alan took his black, no sugar, and didn't sit. He stood over the schematics on the table, eyes scanning with something like recognition, and something darker too. Regret. "You worked on this?" Claire asked. He nodded. "We all did. Back in 91, Project Echo was part of an off-books initiative buried under Homeland Tech Research. Think DARPA's shadow. Section 7 was the branch that handled what no one wanted on the records." She gestured toward the vehicle. "What is it?" Alan looked at her carefully. "It's a containment platform. For energy." Claire frowned. Energy? Not the kind that powers light bulbs. Something unstable. Recovered from a black site near the Baltic. I don't know what they pulled from that pit, but it changed everything. And my dad? She asked quietly. He was the only one who could get the platform to run consistently. Said it was like tuning a machine that wanted to be left alone. Alan sipped his coffee. When the project was shut down, we were told it was dismantled. But your father must have taken steps to hide one of the prototypes. Claire felt like the floor had shifted. He never told me, she whispered. Alan looked at her gently. That wasn't an accident. He was trying to protect you. Claire stood in the doorway of the container, flashlight beam tracing across the vehicle's surface. Alan Burke moved beside her, slower now, almost reverent. The machine no longer felt like a relic. It felt aware, like it had been waiting, listening. He knelt beside the main hatch. This is the access panel, he said. We used to call it the vault, inside the vault. Your father reinforced this part himself. Said if anything ever went wrong, this would be the last line of control. Claire crouched next to him. You said it's a containment platform. What exactly is it containing? Alan didn't answer immediately. He ran his fingers along a recessed latch, the kind that wasn't meant to be seen, let alone opened by just anyone. Energy, he repeated. But not electricity. Not magnetism. Something else. Something intelligent. Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. He looked up at her. It reacts. It stores information. Changes based on who interacts with it. Your dad believed it was alive, not conscious, not in the way we are, but responsive. Like it learned from the hands that touched it. Claire stared at the sealed panel. That's why it shifted when I touched it. He nodded. Exactly. You activated something dormant. End quote. A long silence followed. Claire finally said, If it's so dangerous, why would he leave it for me to find? Alan stood slowly. Because he trusted you. Because you're like him, you listen to machines. You don't just fix them. You understand them. They got to work. Alan pulled a leather-bound notebook from his satchel, thick with handwritten codes and diagrams. Your father didn't trust digital backups. He kept the fail-safe protocols analog. Claire watched him flip through until he found a page marked Vault Access, Revision 3. He handed her the notebook. You'll need to calibrate the interface manually. It'll recognize you now. Claire blinked. Recognize me? It's already responded to your touch. That connection, it's imprinted. Part biological, part residual energy. Once you calibrate the panel, it'll give you partial access. They powered up a portable battery unit and routed it to the main interface. Lights along the base of the vehicle flickered to life-soft blue pulses that moved in rhythm like breathing. Claire stepped closer, placing her hand against the black glass panel on the dashboard. It hummed beneath her fingertips, then lit up fully, not with a boot screen or system prompt, but with a rotating geometric shape, like a cube folding in on itself, endlessly shifting. Alan exhaled. That's it. It's listening. A soft click echoed from the rear of the vehicle. Claire turned. The secondary hatch had opened just a crack, revealing a chamber inside lined with a mirrored alloy that reflected no light. At the center, suspended by 3 magnetic arms, hovered a sphere no larger than a grapefruit. It pulsed once, twice like a heartbeat, and then it stopped. Claire didn't breathe. Alan's voice was barely a whisper. Oh God. It remembers. Claire sat on the steps outside her shop the next morning, eyes fixed on the gravel, while the rising sun painted the rooftops in soft gold. Her fingers were still tingling from the night before, the touch of that pulsing sphere still fresh in her memory. It hadn't moved since, but she'd seen it, felt it respond. Not just to her, but to something inside her, like it recognized her bloodline, like it had been waiting for a Jensen. Inside, Alan was sleeping in the office on a makeshift cot, but Claire hadn't been able to close her eyes. Her mind wouldn't shut off. The implications were too big, too impossible. And that's when the black SUV rolled up. It didn't belong to anyone in town. Glossy, silent, tinted windows, government grade, or worse, private sector with too much money and too few questions. Claire stood as two men stepped out. Clean cut, suits, earpieces. They didn't look like they were here for an oil change. One of them gave a small nod. "Miss Jensen, my name is Agent Carlyle. I represent a firm that deals in sensitive technological recovery." Claire crossed her arms. "You mean corporate cleanup?" He smiled thinly. "We're aware of what you've found, or at least part of it, and I'm here to make a very generous offer." "I'm not selling it," she said flatly. Carlyle's smile didn't falter. "We're prepared to wire $12.5 million immediately, tax-free. We take possession of the container, you walk away. No more questions. No more risk." Claire blinked. 12.5. She'd never seen that kind of number outside of fake sweepstakes commercials. That much money could change everything: the shop, her life, her mother's mortgage, the years of struggle just erased. But she didn't say yes. Instead, she asked, "Why is it worth that much to you?" Carlyle didn't answer right away. He adjusted his sleeve, then said, "Because we've spent the last 30 years trying to recover what your father helped hide." That hit harder than she expected. Claire took a step back. "So this is personal. Not for me, but for some very important people, yes. And what happens if I say no?" His face hardened slightly. "We'd strongly advise against that." She glanced toward the shop, where Alan was probably just waking up, unaware of the suit standing outside. Then she looked back at the container, at what was inside, at what her father might have died protecting. "No," she said, steady now. "You don't get to bury this again." Carlyle's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes darkened. "You'll regret that." He turned without another word. The SUV pulled away without a sound. Claire stood there long after they'd gone, heart pounding harder than it had the night she opened the container. $12 million. She could have walked away, but she realized then this wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, and what you do with the truth when you're the only one brave enough to hold it. The envelope had been buried deep. Claire hadn't noticed it the first few times she'd flipped through the project files. It wasn't in the technical documents or stapled to any schematic. It was inside a manila folder labeled Logistics, Secondary Transit, tucked between shipping manifests and old fuel allocation forms. No markings. No stamps. Just her father's handwriting on the front. For Claire. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were 5 sheets of paper. One was a letter. The rest, copies of old photographs, some she'd never seen before. Her father, years younger, standing beside the very prototype that now sat dormant in her back lot. He wasn't smiling, but there was a look of pride in his eyes. And beside him, another man, Alan, and a third face she didn't recognize. A woman, maybe in her 40s, sharp eyes and dark hair pulled back beneath a lab coat. "Dr. Celine Voss," scrawled on the bottom corner in faint pencil. Claire turned to the letter. "Claire, if you're reading this, then I guess the container found its way back to you. I never wanted that, but part of me always knew it would happen. That machine was supposed to be erased, buried like the mistakes that created it. But some things don't want to stay buried. We built the prototype for something we didn't understand, a storage system for energy that wasn't supposed to exist. Celine believed it could be harnessed, taught, even reasoned with. I wasn't so sure. The more we worked on it, the more it felt like something that watched us back. Not evil, just waiting." Then came the shutdown order. Not from the military, from someone higher, unnamed. We were told to destroy the prototypes, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill something I didn't understand, so I took one, sealed it, and disappeared. I kept it hidden all these years because I thought maybe one day the world would be ready. Or maybe you would. If it's awake, Claire, listen to it. Not just with tools and tech, with your instincts. You've always had that. Even as a kid with a wrench too big for your hands, you saw the soul in machines. That's why I believe in you now. Even from the other side. Don't let them take it. Don't let them silence it again. And whatever happens, don't forget who you are. Dad! Claire sat in the silence of the garage, tears slipping down her cheeks before she even realized they were there. The weight of it all, her father's voice from beyond the grave, the trust he'd placed in her, the responsibility he'd passed down, it was overwhelming. But more than that, it was clarifying. Everything made sense now. Why the sphere had responded to her. Why the interface lit up without command. Why that cold hum felt oddly familiar. It wasn't just a machine. It was a message. And her father had made her its final translator. Claire stood beneath the flickering fluorescence of her father's old workshop, the morning sun just beginning to break across the tops of the trees outside. The prototype sat silently in the back lot, the sphere within still floating between its magnetized arms, waiting. The sphere hadn't pulsed again since that first night, but Claire could feel it, a kind of presence, silent and watching, like a radio tuned to a station just outside human hearing. She hadn't touched it in 2 days, not out of fear, out of respect. She needed time to understand, to plan. Alan had left that morning with a single promise. I'll protect you as long as I can, but this is bigger than both of us. He took his notebook and most of the documents, heading off to meet a contact he trusted from the old days, someone who might help them get ahead of whatever corporation or agency was circling in the dark. Claire stayed behind. She knew her role now wasn't to run or to sell. It was to finish what her father started, to tell the story he never got to tell, and to make sure this discovery, this legacy, didn't vanish into another black file or sealed lab. She walked out to the container alone, laptop tucked under one arm and a fresh notepad under the other. She'd been building something of her own these last 2 nights, a digital replica of the interface, modeled from the documents Alan had left behind and the short time she'd spent with the system. It wasn't complete, not even close, but it was a start. Inside the container, the air was cooler now, calmer. She approached the vehicle, and the panel lit up before she touched it. The cube returned, rotating slowly in space, its lines folding in on themselves like memory in motion. But now, beneath it, new lines of data scrolled. Not words, not code, something else. A pattern, a rhythm. Claire stared at it, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. She whispered, "What are you trying to say?" And then she understood. Not the full meaning, not yet, but she saw the shape of it. It wasn't just storing energy. It was storing knowledge, memory, a record of events, of time, of things not yet written down. This machine, it was a vessel, and somehow, it had chosen her. Claire backed away slowly and returned to the shop, where she spent the next 12 hours recording everything, every response, every pulse, every screen that flickered to life. She built a fireproof cabinet for the original documents. She backed up her laptop to 3 different hard drives, and she reached out to people she never thought she'd contact: engineers, physicists, and one journalist known for exposing hidden government programs. By the end of the week, she wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She was a keeper of something humanity had tried to forget, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't fixing something broken. She was carrying something forward, rewriting the future, one page, one wire, one revelation at a time.